All right, welcome back to Ohm's Law and calculations. So the first thing I want you to do is give yourself the two triangles. And start filling in the electrical quantities, the variables we use, the units we use. All right, so pause the video, give yourself a few minutes, and then restart the video when you're ready to see the solutions. All right. So remember, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, so the important dessert in Thanksgiving is pie. So we have P-I-E. And then singing to you, Old MacDonald had a farm. E-I-E-I, ohms. We'll get you started. And then remember, ohms is a measure of resistance. And we very sensibly use an R. And the last thing about that, abbreviating ohms with an O would be confusing. So we use a Greek letter omega instead. All right, the other electrical quantities. E. E is the variable we use for voltage. And voltage is measured in volts. And voltage has another name, starting with an E. Electromotive force. The force that causes electricity to move. So electromotive, moving electricity. Then we have I. I is the current. Flow of electricity. Another name for current is amperage. Amperage is measured in amps, which is actually short for amperes. Which leaves us with P. P for power. And another name for power is wattage. And wattage is measured in watts. And the I and the E repeat. All right. And the reason I write them like this in the triangle is so that you can get your formulas.
All Stern Lake and Ticonderoga CV texting may now be dismissed. Stern Lake and Ticonderoga CV texting.
All right, so imagine covering up the I on top, which I can't do on video. If I cover up the E on top, I'm left with I and R on the bottom. So E equals I and R right next to each other would imply multiplication. Similarly, if I cover up the I, I'm left with E over R, so E divided by R. And on the other side, if I cover up R, I'm left with E over I, so E divided by I. For power, it works the same way. If I cover up power, I'm left with I and E right next to each other, so multiplying. If I cover up the E, I'm left with P over E, so P divided by E. And if I cover up the E, I'm left with P over I, so P divided by I. All right, so I start with that because they're not going to give you that on the test. You're going to have to go into the test and write your triangles. You're going to at least want to do the EIR, PIE, okay, so that you can get the formulas, and then remembering that P is power and all the rest of it. All right, let's look at some examples of calculations. So remember, given any two quantities, you can find the third. So I have 6.9 amps and 214 ohms, and I'm looking for voltage. So the first thing I would do is go through and assign the variables. 6.9 amps, you're going to use a I for amps. 214 ohms, you're going to use a R for ohms. And volts, you're going to use an E. So do you have a triangle that has I, R, and E in it? Yes. Okay, that's your first triangle, EIR. So the formula E equals, it's going to be I times R. And we have I and R, so we can multiply 6.9 times 214. Calculator comes out 1,476.6. We could round that to 1,477. And voltage is measured in volts. Or you sometimes see it abbreviated as a V for volts. All right. Number 7. Given 579 watts and 9.1 amps, solving for voltage. All right, so again, go through and assign your variables. Watts is going to be P for power, 9.1 amps, I for the current, voltage, E, electromotive force. Do you have a triangle that has P, I, and E in it? Yes. So my formula E equals, it's going to be P divided by I. I've got power, 579, and I've got amps, 9.1. So I divide those numbers. 63.6. So we can round to 64. Voltage is measured in volts. Or 64 V for volts. All right. Turn it over. Number 8. Given 115 volts and 1.3 amps, solve for resistance. So assign your variables. Volts is going to be the E. Amps is going to be the I. Resistance is going to be the R. Do you have a triangle with E, I, and R in it? Yes, you do. E, I, R. So R is going to equal E divided by I. I've got E, 115, divided by I, 1.3. Go into my calculator, 88.5, rounds to 89, and resistance is measured in ohms. If I were to abbreviate that, I would do 89 ohms. All right. And number 9. Number 9 gets a bit more complicated, as life does. Assign your variables. 220 volts, so that'll be an E. 904 watts, so that'll be a P. And resistance will be an R. Do I have a triangle with E, P, and R in it? I do not. So I want you to ignore the resistance side for now. Do I have a triangle with P and E in it? I do. P, P, I, E. So I'm going to use this triangle. If I have E and P, I'm going to find I. I equals P divided by E, 904 divided by 220. That'll give me 4.109 amps. 4.109 A for amps. I go out to thousandths on amps because a thousandth of an amp, remember, is when you start to feel it. Okay, 1 amp is a very large amount, so we go out a few more places. All right, so I've got I. Now I can come back over to R. What's the triangle that has R in it? The only triangle you have with R in it is the EIR triangle. So R would equal E divided by I. All right, I had E all the time, 220, and now I have I because I calculated it, so I'll put in 4.109, and I can divide those. 53.54, so rounds to 54. Resistance measured in ohms. If you abbreviate it, 54 ohms. Number 10. Given 405 watts and 4.7 amps, solve for resistance. The first thing you want to do is assign your variables. 405 watts, so we'll use a P. 4.7 amps, we'll use an I. And resistance, we'll use an R. We have a triangle with EI and R. Not EI and R, PI and R. I do not. So we're going to ignore the resistance for a moment. Do I have a triangle with P and I in it? I do. P, I, E. So I can find E, given P and I. E equals P divided by I, or 405 divided by 4.7. Comes out to 86.17. So we call that 86 volts. 86 volts. All right, coming over to R. What triangle has R in it? The EIR triangle. So if I'm looking for R, R equals E divided by I. I've got E now because I just calculated it. 86 divided by I current, 4.7. If you divide that, I actually use 4.86.17. Divide that, you get 18.3. So 18. Resistance measured in ohms. 18 ohms. All right, so those are examples of the calculations you can do for electrical quantities with Ohm's law and the power law. All right, thank you for watching. Study those triangles if you had trouble filling them out to start, because that's going to be a constant. You're going to need to know those triangles. All right.